At 66, I'd been called a lot of things: chatty, nosy. The kind of woman who knew everyone's business before they did, but Constance Gallagher, my daughter's mother-in-law, had recently upgraded me to that meddling fabric peddler. And somehow, I wore it like a badge of honor, especially now, watching her smile at my daughter Daria like frosted glass. Constance Gallagher, 69 and razor-sharp in her street, John knit suit, presided over her Brighton dining room like a queen granting audience. The Sunday afternoon light caught the crystal vase of white roses she'd arranged just so. Everything in her immaculate home positioned for maximum effect. She poured tea from her grandmother's silver service, the picture of gracious hospitality. "Daria, dear, you look tired," Constance said, her voice dripping with concern that landed like acid. "Are you sure you're managing everything? Preston works such long hours, and May needs so much attention at this age." My daughter Daria, 35 but looking older that afternoon, set down her tea with hands that trembled just enough to tell me everything her smile tried to hide. "We're managing fine, Constance. Everything's under control." "Of course you are, sweetheart." Constance's smile never wavered, though I did notice May's lunch yesterday wasn't very nutritious. "Store-bought again?" Preston Gallagher, 37 and perpetually caught in the middle, stood by the window with his hands in his pockets. The posture of a man who'd learned long ago that silence was safer than choosing sides. His mother's words washed over him like background noise he'd trained himself not to hear. "I should have said something right then," called her out, defended Daria in front of Preston. But I'd learned long ago that women like Constance don't lose public battles. They win them before you know you're fighting. The scones were homemade, the criticism expertly disguised as care. Daria's shoulders hunched with each perfectly delivered barb about her parenting, her appearance, her household management. Constance never raised her voice, never lost that pleasant smile. She was performing, and we were her captive audience. I excused myself to retrieve my scarf from the coat closet, grateful for the escape. The hallway was cooler, quieter, lined with family photographs documenting Constance's careful curation of appearances. But passing her study, I heard her voice, not the honeyed tone from the dining room, but something colder, sharper. "The agreement needs to be in place before the anniversary," she said into her phone, unaware I'd frozen 3 feet from her partially open door. "If she signs voluntarily, it's cleaner." My hand froze on the closet door. The woman I'd just watched serve perfect tea and homemade scones was discussing my daughter like a problem to be managed, eliminated, erased. "She'll sign," Constance continued, her satisfaction chilling. "I've been laying groundwork for months. She doubts everything about herself now." The hallway tilted. Months. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty or family friction. This was strategy. "By June, she'll withdraw on her own," Constance said, her voice cold and clinical. "They always do when the pressure's applied correctly." I stood in that hallway, scarf forgotten in my hands, while Constance's voice drifted through the study door, cold, methodical, discussing my daughter's dismantling like a project timeline. They always do when the pressure's applied correctly. Always. Which meant Daria wasn't the first, and I needed to know who came before her. The study door opened before I could move, and Constance stood framed in the doorway like she'd been waiting for me all along, no surprise on her face, no embarrassment. Just cold calculation. "How long have you been standing there, Lillian?" she asked, her voice as smooth as the silk scarf still clutched in my hands. "Long enough, I imagine." My throat went dry, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Constance, what you said about Daria is family business." She stepped into the hallway, pulling the study door closed behind her with a quiet click. "Your daughter married into this family. You did not." The words landed like a slap, precise and stinging. She wasn't denying the conversation I'd overheard. She wasn't scrambling for explanations or softening her position. She was simply stating facts, as if I'd caught her discussing the weather instead of orchestrating my daughter's psychological dismantling. "She's my daughter," I said, hating how my voice wavered. "If you think I'm going to stand by while I what exactly?" Constance tilted her head, almost curious. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't laid a hand on anyone. I've simply been a concerned mother-in-law, offering guidance to a struggling young mother who clearly needs help managing her household." The casual cruelty of it took my breath. She'd weaponized concern so thoroughly that any accusation I made would sound hysterical, paranoid. Who would believe the meddling fabric peddler over the respected former president of the Rochester Women's Heritage Society? She thought I was harmless, a chatty old woman who sold fabric for 30 years and knew nothing of real power. And maybe that's exactly what I needed her to think. I'd suggest you stick to what you understand, Constance continued, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. Fabric swatches and gossip. Leave family matters to those equipped to handle them. Equipped to handle them, I repeated, tasting the condescension. People who interfere in my family tend to find themselves... She paused, considering her words with the care of someone selecting the perfect knife. Isolated. Preston listens to me. Lillian. Daria respects me. Your involvement would only make things harder for your daughter. The threat was clear, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. She was giving me an out back away quietly. Let her continue her campaign. Pretend I'd heard nothing. The price for interference was watching Daria lose everything. Standing in that hallway, dismissed like lint she'd brushed from her expensive suit. I understood something crucial. Constance had won every battle by making her opponents feel small. But she'd never fought someone who'd spent decades being underestimated and using it. Do what you feel you must, Lillian, she said, her tone almost bored now, as if my resistance was already factored into her calculations and found wanting. It won't change the outcome. They always think they can help. A pause. They're always wrong. That word again, always. How many had there been before Daria? How many women had stood where I stood, heard variations of this same threat, and walked away? I made myself nod, made myself look defeated. I understand. I thought you might. She turned back toward her study, already dismissing me. Do give Daria my love on your way out. Tell her I'll call her tomorrow about the garden club luncheon. I walked past Daria without stopping, couldn't risk showing her the fury burning through my veins. Through the window, I saw Preston helping his mother with something, oblivious as always. Constance watched me leave from her study window, that satisfied smile still in place. She thought she'd warned me off. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong seamstress. My phone rang before I'd even reached the end of her street, a number I hadn't seen in years. The phone rang before I'd made it 3 blocks from Constance's house, a number I hadn't seen in years. One I'd nearly deleted a dozen times but never quite did. Edna Merrick's voice came through tinny on the car speaker, 67 years old, and still serving on every Heritage Society committee. The kind of woman who knew everyone's business and usually kept it to herself. Which made this call all the more interesting. Lillian, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, she said. That familiar slight warble in her voice that made everything sound like a confidence. I wanted to touch base about the fall fundraiser. You're still willing to donate fabric samples for the silent auction? Of course, I managed, trying to shift mental gears from Constance's threats to committee business. Same as last year. Wonderful, wonderful. There was a pause, the kind Edna always left when she was circling around to her real point. I ran into Preston's brother last month, Martin. Remember? Asked about his ex-wife, the one who left so suddenly. Still won't talk about it. My foot eased off the gas. I didn't realize Preston had a sister-in-law before. Oh, this was years back. Sweet girl, worked at the hospital respiratory therapist, I think. Then one day she just left. Filed for divorce, moved out of state, never came back, not even for holidays. The streetlights blurred. That's sad. Between you and me. Edna lowered her voice the way she always did when sharing something she'd promised not to tell. I always wondered about the timing. She seemed so withdrawn those last few months, almost like someone had convinced her she didn't belong. How many times had I heard about women who just couldn't handle their in-laws, who chose to leave their marriages? How many of those stories had I accepted at face value? Never questioning what pressure looked like when it wore pearls and served perfect scones. Do you remember her name? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Valerie something. Thompson No. Thornton. Valerie Thornton. Why? Just curious. My mind raced. What made you think of her? Another pause. Longer this time. Lillian, I was at Constance's last week for a Heritage Society planning meeting. I saw how she spoke to Daria when she thought no one was paying attention. The same little digs. The same concerned smile. It reminded me of before. So the call wasn't coincidental. Edna had noticed. Maybe Edna had been noticing for years. How long ago did Valerie leave? I asked. 8 years, maybe 9. Martin remarried eventually, moved to Buffalo. But he never talks about his first marriage. Not even to family. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. That girl, Martin's ex-wife, had been someone's daughter too. Had her mother seen the signs? Had she tried to intervene? Or had Constance perfected her method on that poor woman first? learning exactly how much pressure a daughter-in-law could take before breaking. "Thank you for calling about the fundraiser," I said carefully, wondering how much Edna actually knew, how much she was trying to tell me without saying it outright. "Of course," her voice softened. "And Lillian, if you need help with anything research for the auction, old committee records, that sort of thing, you know where to find me." Committee records, old records. Edna wasn't just telling me about Valerie, she was offering to help me find her. I pulled over on Park Avenue, engine still running, Edna's voice still in my ear talking about committee schedules. But all I could hear was Constance's cold satisfaction on that phone call. They always do. Plural. Not Daria, them. This wasn't my daughter's personal failing or her marriage's unique struggle. This was Constance's proven system, and Daria was just the latest target. I needed to find Martin's ex-wife, and I needed to do it before Constance realized I was looking. I waited until Monday evening, Preston working late, May at gymnastics, before I drove to my daughter's house in Penfield. Armed with questions I didn't know how to ask and answers I was terrified to hear. Finding Valerie would take time. Research, careful maneuvering. But Daria was here now, suffering now. And I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. She answered the door with that too bright smile I'd seen at Constance's house, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, what a nice surprise." "I brought that lasagna you like," I lied, holding up the dish I'd made that afternoon as an excuse. "Thought you and the girls could use a break from cooking." Her kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and vanilla candles. Everything spotless in that exhausted way that spoke of constant performance. She poured tea with hands that trembled just enough to make the china rattle against the saucer. "Sweetheart," I started carefully. "I wanted to talk about yesterday. Some of the things Constance said." "She's just particular, Mom." Daria cut me off with forced brightness. "You know how mothers-in-law can be." "Particular isn't the word I'd use." "It's fine, really." She set down the teapot and gripped the counter, knuckles white. "Preston and I are fine. May's fine. We're managing. Managing shouldn't require this much effort, honey." I'd read about this, how victims defend their abusers, how they minimize and excuse and protect the very people destroying them. Reading about it in a case study was one thing. Watching my own daughter do it, watching her hands shake while she insisted everything was fine, was another entirely. "Has she always been like this?" I asked gently. "With you." Daria's shoulders hunched, that defensive curl I'd seen prey animals make. "Like what?" "Critical, undermining, making you feel like you're not good enough for her son." For a moment, just a flash, I saw something in her eyes. Recognition. Relief. Like she'd been waiting years for someone to name what was happening, to prove she wasn't imagining the cruelty dressed up as concern. Then the shutters came down. "She means well," Daria whispered. "She just has high standards, and I'm not always the best at—" "Stop!" I reached across the table, took her trembling hands in mine. "Whatever she's told you about yourself, it's a lie." Daria's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back furiously. "You don't understand." "If I just tried harder, if I could just meet her expectations." "There are no expectations you can meet. That's the point. She moves the goalposts every time you get close." The worst part wasn't her denial. It was the flicker of hope I saw when I first mentioned Constance, like she'd been waiting for someone to notice. To name what was happening, followed immediately by terror as she shut it down. Constance had taught her that hope was dangerous. "Mom, please," her voice broke. "I need you to leave this alone. If you push her, if you say something, she'll—" She stopped, caught herself. "Please, promise me you won't make it worse." "Make it worse how?" But she just shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "Just promise, please." I promised I wouldn't make it worse, because what else could I do with my daughter sitting across from me, eyes pleading, body trembling but driving home? I understood something Daria didn't yet. It was already worse, and the only way out was through. The question wasn't whether to act, it was how to do it without her knowing until it was too late for Constance to retaliate. I needed allies who understood what I was up against. Edna was already waiting when I arrived at Spot Coffee Wednesday afternoon, sitting in the back corner with 2 cups in front of her, one for me. Black with 1 sugar, the way I'd taken it for 30 years. She'd chosen the table deliberately, I realized. Private, out of sight from the window. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I didn't call you by accident Sunday." Edna pushed the coffee toward me, her expression grave. "I've been waiting 2 years for someone in that family to finally notice what Constance does." 2 years. since I saw the same look on Daria's face that Valerie had before she left. The coffee was still hot, steam curling between us. Tell me about Valerie. Valerie Martin Gallagher's ex-wife, whose first name was all Edna remembered, now had been a hospital nurse before Constance convinced her she couldn't manage anything more demanding than being a proper Gallagher wife, smart, capable, well-liked by everyone who knew her. Within a year of marrying Martin, she was a ghost. Stopped seeing friends, Edna said, her voice quiet but precise, reciting details she'd clearly cataloged for years. Quit the hospital. Barely spoke at family gatherings. Constance called it helping her adjust to family expectations. But it wasn't adjustment. It was systematic dismantling. Every decision Valerie made, Constance questioned. Every friend Constance found problematic. Every parenting choice they had, a son Constance corrected publicly. She never yelled, never lost her temper. Just applied constant, careful pressure until Valerie stopped believing in her own competence. How many Valerias had there been? How many daughters-in-law had? Constance perfected her technique on before Daria. And how many women? Like Edna had sat in coffee shops afterward, carrying the weight of having watched and done nothing. Why didn't anyone stop it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. 3 women tried. Edna's expression hardened. Sarah Brennan confronted Constance at a society meeting about how she spoke to Valerie. Within 6 months, Sarah was removed from the board. Constance had documentation of inappropriate financial management that appeared from nowhere. Turned out to be nothing, but the damage was done. I set down my cup. And the others? Janet Morrison tried to maintain friendship with Valerie despite Constance's disapproval. Found herself socially isolated, invitations stopped, committees dropped her, old friends suddenly too busy. She moved to Florida within a year. The third. Edna's hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her cup. Karen Hughes. She encouraged Valerie to see a therapist, told her the treatment wasn't normal. Constance filed a defamation lawsuit, claimed Karen was spreading malicious lies about her family. Cost Karen her business, her marriage, nearly her house before she settled and signed an NDA. Edna's hands shook slightly as she described the woman who'd tried to help Valerie and lost her business, her reputation, her marriage, all because she'd underestimated how far Constance would go. The message was clear, caring wasn't enough. I needed to be smarter than my enemy. She fights to destroy, I said quietly. Always has, always will. Edna leaned forward. Direct confrontation gives her ammunition, witnesses she can discredit, documentation she can twist. She's been doing this for decades. Lillian, she knows how to win. Then how? You build a case she can't twist, evidence she can't explain away, support she can't isolate. Edna slid a folded paper across the table, a name and number scrawled in blue ink. Otis Ashford, estate attorney. Used to be one of your regulars at the fabric shop, if I remember right. He's seen Constance's legal maneuvering up close, helped one of her targets minimize the damage. She stood to leave, touched my shoulder. Build your case carefully, Lillian, because you'll only get one chance to use it. I had the attorney's number in my pocket and a warning ringing in my ears. I didn't wait until morning to call Otis Ashford. By 8 that evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table with Edna's note smoothed, flat beside the phone, dialing numbers I'd remembered from helping him pick wire-rimmed glasses a decade ago. Lillian. His voice came through warm at first, surprised and pleased. I haven't heard from you since what? 2018, when you closed the shop. 2019, I corrected automatically. Otis, I need legal advice about a family matter. The warmth shifted instantly to careful precision. Otis Ashford, 52 years old and still grateful I'd helped him pick the right frames back when he was a young associate. Became the attorney who'd seen what Constance Gallagher could do with insufficient evidence. Before you go further, he said carefully, I need to know, is this about the Gallagher family? Because if it is, you need to understand what you're stepping into. My hand tightened on the phone. You know, I've suspected for years, but suspicion isn't evidence. A pause. Who are we protecting? My daughter, Daria, Preston's wife. How bad is it? I told him. Not everything, not the overheard phone call or Edna's warnings about destroyed challengers, but enough. The systematic criticism, the isolation, the way Daria's confidence had eroded over 3 years of marriage, the trembling hands, enforced brightness, and desperate plea for me not to make it worse. Psychological abuse, Otis said when I finished, his voice grim. Real, documentable, and legally actionable, but only with concrete proof. You need dates, times, witnesses, specific incidents. Ideally written communications, recordings, or multiple credible testimonies establishing pattern over time. This was the moment it stopped being about a mother's protective rage and became something else entirely, a calculated operation with legal stakes and evidentiary requirements. I was no longer just Daria's mom. I was becoming the architect of Constance's exposure. What constitutes a credible witness? I asked, pulling a notepad toward me. Someone with no axe to grind. Neutral observers who saw specific incidents and can testify to specific words, actions, dates. Family testimony helps, but isn't sufficient alone. Constance would claim bias. You need outsiders who witnessed her behavior. And documentation? Best case text messages, emails, recorded conversations where applicable. Dated journal entries describing incidents immediately after they occur. Photos if there's visible distress. Medical records if Daria sought help for anxiety or depression triggered by the abuse. I was writing fast, filling pages. How much evidence? Enough to establish pattern. Not isolated incidents. Think months, not weeks. Multiple witnesses to multiple events. The more you have, the harder it is for her to explain away as misunderstanding or family friction. Otis was asking me to document my daughter's suffering with the precision of a court stenographer, to watch her being hurt and take notes instead of intervening. Every protective instinct screamed against it. But every strategic thought whispered, "This is how you save her." "This isn't gathering gossip, Lillian." His voice gentled slightly. "This is building a legal case against someone with resources and connections. Every piece of evidence must be unimpeachable. Can you commit to that level of documentation? Because half measures won't just fail, they'll make things worse." I thought of Daria's hands shaking around her teacup, of Valerie, disappeared into another state, of the 3 women Edna had described, destroyed for trying to help. "Yes," I said, "and I can commit." "Then start now. Document everything you witness going forward. Dates, times, exact words when possible. Who else was present? Keep it somewhere Constance can't access, not your house if she ever visits." "What's the timeline?" "At least 3 months of solid documentation. 6 is better. This isn't a sprint. Lillian, it's a campaign." I hung up with pages of notes what constituted admissible evidence, which witnesses would hold weight, how to document without alerting Constance. The fabric shop had taught me to see patterns in chaos, to know exactly how much tension thread could take before snapping. Now I'd apply those same skills to something infinitely more delicate, proving invisible wounds before they became permanent scars. I wouldn't have to wait long for the next opportunity to observe. Saturday dinner at Constance's house felt different this time, not because anything had changed in that dining room, but because everything had changed in me. Sitting there with Otis's evidence checklist memorized and a small notebook hidden in my purse. My granddaughter May, 6 years old with her father's dark curls and a quietness that worried me more than any tantrum could, sat very still in her chair, already learning that safety meant invisibility at Nana Constance's table. Constance served her famous herb-roasted chicken with the same gracious smile she always wore. The dining room smelling of rosemary and fresh bread. Everything appeared normal, Preston pouring wine, Daria helping May cut her chicken. Polite conversation about weather and neighborhood news. Then Constance struck, timing it perfectly while Preston was distracted refilling glasses. "Daria, darling, you must try my new dessert recipe." Her voice was warm honey, the smile indulgent. "Though perhaps just a small piece, you've been looking so tired lately, and we both know stress weight is the hardest to lose." A laugh, light and affectionate, especially at your age. Preston, not hearing the full comment, looked up from the wine bottle. "Mom's desserts are always amazing." "Well, some of us maintain discipline." Constance's smile never wavered. "It's so important for May to see healthy habits modeled. Don't you think?" Before, I would have jumped to Daria's defense, made it worse by making it visible. Now I sat there taking mental notes like a stenographer at a trial, 6:47 p.m. Comment about weight and parenting linked to concern. Preston distracted. May present. Daria's practiced blank expression suggesting this happens regularly. Daria reached for her water glass, face carefully neutral. "I'll just have coffee, thank you." "Of course." Constance patted her hand. "I'm only looking out for you." "Sweetheart, that's what mothers do." May looked between her mother and grandmother, confusion flickering across her young face. "Mommy looks pretty?" "Of course she does." "Sweetheart." Constance's smile brightened. "Grandma's just concerned that's what family does." I watched the whole exchange with new eyes. Not impulsive cruelty, but calibrated strike-timed when Preston couldn't hear the full context. Worded to sound like loving concern if challenged. delivered with a smile that would make any objection seem like overreaction. If I'd called it out, she'd have been bewildered, hurt that I'd misunderstood her care for her daughter-in-law. What broke my heart wasn't the attack itself, it was how smoothly Daria absorbed it, face going neutral like she'd been trained, reaching for her water glass with a hand that didn't shake because she'd learned not to show reaction. She'd been doing this so long it had become muscle memory. Preston topped off his mother's wine. Oblivious. May picked at her chicken. Quiet again. The conversation moved on Constance asking Preston about work, discussing May's upcoming school program, commenting on the neighborhood association meeting. Surface normalcy restored as if nothing had happened. Because to everyone but Daria and me, nothing had. "Excuse me," I said, standing. "I'll just use the powder room." In the bathroom with the door locked, I pulled out my phone and opened the password-protected notes app I'd created that afternoon. Typed with shaking hands. May 10th, 6:47 p.m. Constance's dining room. Weight/parenting comment disguised as concern. Exact words, stress weight is the hardest to lose, especially at your age, plus important for May to see healthy habits modeled. Witnesses Preston partial, distracted by wine. May full. Visible confusion. Daria's response practiced dissociation, no visible reaction. Pattern timed when Preston couldn't hear full context, framed as loving concern, plausible deniability if challenged. First entry in what would become a catalog of invisible wounds. The evidence Otis needed was building, one documented cruelty at a time. But documentation alone wouldn't be enough. I needed someone on the inside to confirm what I was seeing. Preston insisted on walking me to my car, the kind of gentlemanly gesture that might have seemed considerate if I didn't recognize it. For what it was, a man trying to ease his own conscience while doing absolutely nothing to help his wife. The driveway was dark except for the porch light. May evening, cool enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. Preston had his hands in his pockets. That studied casual posture men adopt when they're about to say something difficult. "Look, Lillian," he started, not meeting my eyes. "I know Mom can be particular, set in her ways, but that's just how she is with daughters-in-law. It's not personal." I stopped at my car door. "Not personal, Preston. Did you hear what she said to Daria tonight?" "I heard something about dessert." He shifted his weight. "Mom's always watching her weight. She probably meant it as helpful advice." "Helpful advice that made your wife's hands shake." "Daria's sensitive." The words came fast, defensive. "She takes things the wrong way sometimes." There it was, not ignorance but active choice. He'd heard enough to know something was wrong and chosen the explanation that required nothing of him. Your daughter was sitting right there. Preston. May heard her grandmother criticize her mother's weight in parenting. "What do you think that teaches her?" His jaw tightened. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but this is between Daria and Mom. They need to work it out themselves. There are different kinds of complicity. Constance chose cruelty actively. Preston chose comfort passively. But the result for Daria was the same isolation, with her husband's silence teaching her that what she endured was somehow normal. Somehow her fault for being too sensitive. "Work it out themselves," I repeated. "Your wife and your mother. Two equals in a disagreement. They're both strong women." He pulled his keys from his pocket, signaling the conversation's end. "I can't get in the middle. My job is to keep the peace, not choose sides. Choosing not to choose is still a choice, Preston, and you're choosing your mother." "That's not fair." But he took a step back toward the house. "I love Daria. I want them both to be happy. Getting involved would just make things worse." "Worse for whom?" He didn't answer that. Just gave me a tight smile and walked back toward the warm light spilling from his mother's windows, leaving me standing in the driveway with my car keys and my documentation and the cold certainty that my daughter's husband would never save her. I'd hoped, foolishly, that showing Preston the pattern would wake something protective in him. Instead, I'd learned something worse he already knew. He'd always known. And he'd chosen his mother's approval over his wife's sanity, day after day, dinner after dinner, attack after attack. I sat in my car watching Preston disappear back into his mother's house, back to the warmth and the leftover dessert and the comfortable lie that everything was fine. Daria was surrounded by people who loved her, and not one of them would lift a finger to help. Not Preston, who saw and looked away. Not the friends who'd stopped calling. Not the family who accepted Constance's version of reality. I pulled out my phone and added to my notes, May 10th, 8:15 p.m. driveway conversation. Preston admits awareness of difficult mother-in-law behavior, but refuses intervention. Frames as conflict between two strong women requiring neutrality. Explicit statement, I can't get in the middle. Enablement confirmed as deliberate choice, not ignorance. If my daughter was going to survive this, it would be because I dismantled Constance's power myself, methodically, completely, and without waiting for permission from the people who'd already failed her. Chapter 3 would be different, no more observing, no more hoping for allies inside the family. Just me, my evidence, and a plan. Monday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 notebooks, a list of 87 names from 30 years of fabric shop customers, and the kind of clarity that comes from realizing no one is coming to save the people you love, you have to build the rescue yourself. The first notebook I labeled Timeline and Evidence. Now, I started with January 2026, the month Nathan and Daria married, and began cataloging every incident I'd witnessed or Daria had mentioned. Each entry got a date, location, witnesses present, and Constance's exact words when I could remember them. The fabric of cruelty, I was learning, had patterns just like the bolts I'd sold for 3 decades. You had to lay it out flat. Examine the weave. Identify where the threads crossed to create damage. The second notebook became witness accounts. I wrote the name of every person who'd been present during Constance's performances. Margaret Chen at the bridal shower. 4 neighbors at the Easter dinner. Doctor. Patricia Morrison, Daria's former therapist, who I'd sent fabric samples to for her office curtains in 2019. 12 people at Nathan's birthday party in June. Every witness was a thread I could pull. The third notebook was my arsenal, though I titled it simply Resources. This was where 30 years of running Harrington's fine fabrics paid dividends I'd never anticipated. 87 names from my customer list, but I wasn't interested in all of them, only the ones whose professions could matter. Laura Vasquez, family law attorney, who'd ordered sage linen for her office remodel in 2023. James Whitmore, investigative journalist for the Tribune, whose wife bought quilting cotton every month. Doctor. Susan Chen, clinical psychologist specializing in family trauma, who'd commissioned custom curtains in 2021. I'd measured their windows, remembered their children's names, attended their fundraisers. Now I needed them to measure Constance's cruelty with the same precision I'd once measured their fabric. People underestimated fabric shop owners. We were supposed to be chatty, harmless, good for gossip and discount recommendations. What they forgot was that running a small business for 30 years meant building a network of professionals who trusted you, owed you favors, or simply liked you enough to take a phone call. I wasn't just Daria's meddling mother. I was a woman who'd employed half the neighborhood's teenagers, donated to every school fundraiser, and knew which lawyer was going through a divorce, which therapist had a narcissistic mother, which journalist was hungry for a story about psychological abuse in affluent families. I spent 90 minutes making calls. Laura Vasquez agreed to coffee on Wednesday, off the record, just advice between friends. James Whitmore said he'd been looking for a follow-up to his elder abuse series. This angle intrigued him. Doctor. Chen remembered me immediately. Mrs. Harrington, those curtains still look beautiful. What can I do for you? By 9:45 a.m., I had 3 coffee meetings scheduled, 2 professional consultations booked, and a growing sense that Constance had made a tactical error. She'd assumed I was an amateur, a worried mother with no resources beyond nagging. She hadn't considered that 30 years of selling fabric meant 30 years of listening to people's problems, offering advice, building trust. Every transaction had been a relationship. Every relationship was now a weapon. I was writing Dr. Chen's appointment details Thursday. 2 p.m., her office on Maple when my phone rang. Daria's name on the screen. But the time was wrong. She should have been in her first meeting of the day. I answered, "Honey." "Mom." Her voice was thin, barely controlled. Constance called my supervisor. She told him I've been having a mental health crisis and she's worried about my decision-making at work. He just asked me if I needed time off to address family concerns. The kitchen went very still. "When?" I asked. 10 minutes ago. "Mom, she's trying to destroy my career." "Mom, are you there?" Daria's voice cracked through the phone. And I realized I'd gone silent, not from shock, but from the particular kind of rage that freezes speech, because words feel inadequate, to the damage you're witnessing. "I'm here," I managed. My coffee had gone cold on the kitchen table beside the evidence notebooks. 3 spiral bounds that suddenly felt like children's toys brought to a professional war. "Tell me exactly what she said." Daria was calling from the bathroom at work. I could hear the hollow tile echo, water running somewhere in the background. She told my supervisor I've been under tremendous family stress, that Preston's worried about my health, that May's been having behavioral issues at school because Mommy's too distracted. None of it's true, Mom, but now it's in my personnel file as a wellness concern. I pressed my palm flat against the table, feeling the wood grain bite into my skin. What exactly did your supervisor say? That she appreciated Constance's caring approach. Daria's laugh was bitter. Broken. That they'd work with me through this difficult time. She thinks my mother-in-law is protective. She has no idea Constance is the stress. I could smell my own fear now, metallic, sharp, like blood in the back of my throat. This wasn't family manipulation anymore. This was systematic destruction. The flowers last month, Daria said suddenly, voice dropping. Remember, I mentioned Constance sent my supervisor flowers. Thanking them for understanding during my difficult family period, I thought it was weird, but Preston said Mom was just being thoughtful. The realization hit me like ice water. She was building a paper trail. Wasn't she? Daria's voice cracked completely now, making it look like I've been struggling for weeks. So when my performance actually drops from this pressure from knowing my boss thinks I'm unstable, they'll have documentation. They'll say the pattern was there all along. This is how comprehensive abuse works. It doesn't stay contained to dinner tables and family gatherings. It expands like water finding cracks, seeping into career, friendships, self-sufficiency, until the victim has nowhere left to stand that isn't contaminated by the abuser's reach. Constance hadn't made an impulsive call in anger. She'd been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. The concerned mother-in-law sending flowers in April, laying groundwork, the wellness check in May, activating the trap. Every gesture of care had been documentation. Every thoughtful act a weapon disguised as love. What did you tell your supervisor? I asked. That everything's fine. That Constance tends to worry. That I appreciate everyone's concern, but I'm managing beautifully. Daria paused. I could hear how defensive I sounded. Mom, the more I said I was fine, the less fine I seemed. She's done this before, hasn't she? Set things up so the truth sounds like a lie and the lie sounds reasonable. Yes, I said quietly. That's exactly what she does. I wanted to tell Daria everything: the investigation, the evidence log, the network I was building, Laura Vasquez agreeing to coffee, James Whitmore interested in the story. But if she knew and her behavior changed even slightly, Constance would notice. Abusers were students of their victims. They cataloged every micro-expression, every shift in tone. So I swallowed the truth and gave her what I could, the lie that everything would be okay. When what I meant was, I would make it okay even if she never knew how. Just keep documenting, I told her. Every call, every conversation, dates, times, witnesses. You sound like you're building a legal case. She tried to laugh. I stared at my notebooks, at the 87 names, at 30 years of relationships now weaponized. Just be careful, honey. After we hung up, Daria returning to her desk to perform normalcy under new scrutiny. Me standing in my kitchen surrounded by evidence that suddenly felt desperately inadequate, I understood something crucial. Constance wasn't just cruel. She was strategic, patient, 3 moves ahead. She wasn't trying to control Daria within the family. She was systematically destroying her daughter-in-law's professional credibility, financial independence, every escape route. If Daria lost her job or became too damaged to work, she'd be completely dependent on Nathan, trapped in the marriage with no resources to leave. This wasn't abuse. This was comprehensive imprisonment. The evidence would have to wait. I needed to see May. I was waiting outside May's school at 3 o'clock sharp, not unusual for a grandmother to pick up her grandchild. But today, I wasn't just grandma. I was an investigator about to interview the one witness Constance never thought to hide from. May bounded out in her purple backpack, pigtails flying, and crashed into my legs with a full-body hug. She grabbed my hand as we walked to the car, chattering about papier-mâché volcanoes until the natural pause came. At the car door, buckling her into the booster seat, she said casually, Nana Constance came to school for Grandparents' Day last week. She brought fancy cookies and everyone thought she was so nice. Her voice dropped. But Grandma, why did she say Mommy's hair looks lazy? My hands froze on the seatbelt buckle. When did she say that? Sweetheart, at snack time. Just me and her, when the other kids were playing blocks. May's face was earnest, confused. She said Mommy's hair looked messy lately and good families always look put together. That good girls remind their mommies to try harder. I told Mommy, but she got quiet and didn't say anything. I finished buckling and walked around to the driver's seat, buying seconds to control my breathing. Constance had volunteered for Grandparents' Day Hold'em, public, and used it to access May alone, to plant criticism of Daria directly into a 6-year-old's mind. I started the car. What else did Nana say during snack time? That Mommy seemed tired a lot, that sometimes people need help being better. May kicked her feet against the seat. She asked if Mommy ever forgot to pack my lunch or was late picking me up. I said no because Mommy's never late. But Nana wrote something down in a little notebook anyway. Children are invisible witnesses to adult cruelty present but dismissed. Hearing everything, understanding more than we think. Constance had been using May as surveillance and message delivery. She'd trained my granddaughter to carry observations of inadequacy back to Daria, turning a 6-year-old into an unwitting weapon. And May, confused and loyal, had been delivering them, not understanding why Mommy got quiet. Why the words felt wrong even when they sounded nice. "Does Nana talk to you like that a lot?" I asked, keeping my voice light. May was quiet. Then, "Nana says things to me she doesn't say when Daddy's there." "Is that normal? Like secrets but not fun secrets, worried secrets?" My heart cracked cleanly. "No, honey, that's not normal, but you're very smart for noticing." "I don't like worried secrets," May said softly. "They make my stomach feel tight." I pulled into a parking lot, unable to drive while processing this. What I was about to ask May to remember, to tell me these things. To become a conscious witness to her grandmother's cruelty toward her mother felt like stealing innocence. But May had already lost innocence the first time Constance whispered poison in her ear. All I could do now was help her name what she'd been carrying. I got out, opened May's door, and knelt on the pavement at her eye level. 6 years old, small in her booster seat, shoulders carrying adult secrets. "May, can you help Grandma remember the things Nana Constance says when no other grown-ups are listening, just between us? So we can help Mommy." She nodded, solemn and relieved, like she'd been waiting months for permission to tell someone what she'd known all along was wrong. I had my witness. Now I needed to formalize what we were building. By 7 that evening, I was sitting across from Otis Ashford in his downtown office. 3 notebooks spread between us like surgical instruments, each one documenting a different dimension of how Constance Gallagher had spent years methodically destroying my daughter's sense of self. Otis's office smelled like leather and old paper, the kind of smell that suggested serious work happened here. Rain tapped against the windows. He'd made coffee, real coffee, not the weak office kind, and poured it into mugs that matched, which somehow made the whole thing feel more official. He started with the timeline notebook, running his finger down entries, January through May. Dates, times, witnesses present, direct quotes when available. He looked up. "This is meticulous." 30 years of inventory management, I said. "You learn to document." He moved to the witness notebook, pausing on May's accounts. A 6-year-old's testimony about private comments is powerful precisely because children don't understand strategic lying yet. May's confusion about why Nana says different things to different people, that's devastating credibility. He flipped pages. Combined with Edna's historical pattern and the supervisor interference, you have systematic abuse across years and spheres. I watched him assess the evidence the way I used to assess fabric checking for flaws, measuring quality, determining if it would hold under stress. When he reached the 3rd notebook, professional interference, the supervisor calls. The flower delivery paper trail, his expression shifted from professional interest to something sharper. "The flowers were brilliant," he said quietly. "Evil, but brilliant." Constance documented her own setup. "Is it enough?" I asked. Otis set down his coffee. "For a legal case, yes. To win against someone with Constance's resources and social standing, that's different. She'll hire attorneys, challenge credibility, drag this out until Daria breaks under the pressure. There's a translation that happens when you take emotional truth and convert it to legal language. Constance's cruelty became systematic psychological abuse. May's confused hurt became minor witness testimony regarding pattern of manipulation. It felt clinical. Cold. But clinical and cold were what we needed. Emotion couldn't win this fight. Evidence could. "So what do we do?" I asked. Otis leaned forward, hands folded. "You need a parallel track public record. Simone Redmond at the Democrat and Chronicle covers Heritage Society, community affairs. She knows Constance's reputation." "As what?" "As someone very careful about her image, very strategic about her standing." He tapped the notebook. "If there's documented evidence in print before Constance can spin the narrative, her legal maneuvering gets harder. Abuse thrives in darkness. We need light." I understood what he was proposing. Not just a legal case filed quietly in family court, but a public exposure that would strip Constance's carefully maintained facade. The Heritage Society leader, the concerned grandmother, revealed as a systematic abuser with documented victims across decades. Otis was essentially recommending I weaponize truth through every available channel legal system. Public record. Community awareness until Constance had nowhere left to hide. It felt ruthless. But then I thought of Daria's personnel file marked with wellness concerns, and May carrying worried secrets. And Valerie somewhere in Buffalo still carrying scars. Ruthless was exactly what this required. What do I tell Simone? That you have documentation of a Heritage Society leader systematically abusing family members over decades. Otis pulled a business card from his desk drawer, wrote on the back, and slid it across. Call her tomorrow. I looked at the card. Simone Redmond, investigative reporter, a phone number in Otis's careful handwriting. Just be prepared, Otis said quietly. Once you involve a journalist, this stops being quiet. Constance will know she's being investigated. She'll escalate or she'll retreat, but she'll definitely react. I slipped the card into my purse next to the first one he'd given me 2 weeks ago. 2 cards. Expanding arsenal. I'm ready for her to know, I said. 3 days after leaving Otis's office with a journalist's contact card in my purse, I rang Constance Gallagher's doorbell for what I'd carefully framed as a routine visit, but the moment she opened the door, I knew my investigation had already changed me in ways I couldn't hide. I was watching her differently now, cataloging micro-expressions, listening for subtext, and from the calculated warmth in her smile, Constance had noticed. Lillian, she stepped aside to let me into the foyer. What a lovely surprise. I was just having tea. The sitting room looked like a museum exhibit on genteel living afternoon light filtered through lace curtains. Antique furniture arranged with architectural precision, tea service gleaming on a silver tray. Everything perfect, controlled, exactly like Constance herself. She poured Earl Grey into china cups. You've been asking a lot of questions lately, Lillian. About me, about Beatrice, about the Heritage Society. I'm flattered by the sudden interest. My hand didn't shake taking the cup. Just trying to understand family dynamics better. Douglas's death made me realize how little I know about his family history. Family history? Constance's smile stayed fixed. How diplomatic. But we both know you've been doing more than casual research. Haven't we? I sipped tea that tasted like nothing, my mouth too dry to register flavor. I'm not sure what you mean. Edna Fletcher. Constance settled into her chair with the posture of someone who'd taken etiquette classes as a child. You had quite a long conversation with her 2 weeks ago. She mentioned how interested you were in Douglas's college years. In Valerie. Of course, Edna had told her. The elderly woman had seemed sympathetic, but Constance had known her for 50 years. Loyalty ran deep. Edna has wonderful stories, I said carefully. She does. Constance lifted her cup. She also mentioned you asked very specific questions about my relationship with Valerie. About why the marriage ended. About whether Douglas ever discussed certain incidents. The temperature in this room felt suddenly controlled, like Constance had adjusted a thermostat I couldn't see. This wasn't concern or curiosity. This was interrogation wrapped in grandmother china and afternoon light. I'm trying to help Daria, I said, abandoning pretense. She's struggling. Constance's tone shifted mid-breath from friendly to analytical, the way a surgeon might shift from small talk to diagnosis. Daria's struggling because she's always struggled with consistency, with follow-through, with the basic demands of being a wife and mother. My concern for her wellness at work wasn't criticism. Lillian. It was documentation of a pattern you've apparently decided to ignore. There it was. The supervisor call framed as protective duty rather than strategic sabotage. May seems happy. I tried. May is 6. Children are resilient until they're not. Constance paused. I understand you've been picking her up from school more often lately, having long conversations. Ice water down my spine. She knew about May. I'm her grandmother. Of course you are, just as I am. Constance smiled. Though I wonder what kinds of questions you've been asking a 6-year-old about private family matters. This was the moment to retreat, to apologize, deflect, preserve the illusion of peaceful coexistence. Instead, I met her eyes. The same kinds of questions you've been answering for her at Grandparents' Day, at snack time, when no other adults are present. The silence stretched like fabric pulled too tight. Constance set down her teacup with deliberate precision, the soft clink of china against silver marking the end of pleasantries. Careful, Lillian. Her voice was ice dressed in silk. Curiosity can be dangerous, especially when you start asking questions about things you don't understand. Family is complicated. Accusations are permanent, and reputations, once damaged, rarely recover. She wasn't talking about her reputation. I left 5 minutes later, driving away from the perfect house on the perfect street while my hands finally started shaking. Constance's warning wasn't defensive, it was strategic. She knew I was building something, and instead of denial, she'd issued a challenge. The hunter had become the hunted, and I had to decide retreat to safety, or escalate knowing Constance was now actively watching my every move. I was ready to escalate. I escalated straight into a trap. Preston wouldn't meet my eyes when I arrived at their house Saturday morning. And Daria's smile was the kind you wear to funerals manufactured, fragile, already apologizing for what was about to happen. "Thanks for coming, Mom." She hugged me too tightly in the doorway, and I could feel her trembling. Preston wanted to talk to us both. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pancakes nobody was eating. Preston stood by the counter with his arms crossed, looking everywhere except at me, the posture of a man who'd been given a script he didn't want to deliver. "Mrs. Harrington." He'd never called me that before. Always Lillian, always warm. Mom Constance called again last night. "She's upset about questions you've been asking." I set my purse down carefully. "What exactly did she tell you?" "That you're trying to damage her reputation. That you've been talking to lawyers about her." He finally looked at me. "That you're accusing her of abusing Daria." The word hung in the air like smoke. Daria made a small sound, half denial, half confirmation. "I've been trying to understand family history," I said, keeping my voice level. Douglas's death raised questions. "Questions?" Preston's jaw tightened. "Mom says you've been interrogating her friends, interviewing May at school, building some kind of case. She thinks you're—" He stopped. "What?" I asked. "What does she think?" "That you're experiencing some kind of grief-induced paranoia, that maybe you need help." There it was. Constance had preemptively reframed my investigation as elder mental decline. Not abuse documentation, but delusional persecution. She'd turned my son's death into evidence of my instability. "Preston," I tried to reach him, "has Constance ever made you feel like you're the problem when she's the one causing harm?" "She's my mother." His voice cracked slightly. "She raised me alone after Dad died. She's always put family first." "Has she—" I looked at Daria, whose face had gone pale. "Ask your wife if Constance puts family first, or if she puts control first." Daria's first sob cut through the room like breaking glass. "Mom, please." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this. Preston's family is everything to me." "His mother is—" "Destroying you," I finished quietly. "Helping me." Daria's voice rose. "She's been nothing but supportive since the wedding." The supervisor call was concern. The school visits were grandmotherly love. "You're making everything into something dark when it's just normal family." She believed it, or she needed to believe it to survive. Preston put his arm around her shoulders. "Mrs. Harrington, I think you should stop whatever investigation you're conducting. For Daria's sake, for our family's sake." "I'm trying to protect her," I said. "Then stop," Daria whispered. "Please just stop." I looked at my daughter, 35 years old, crying in her own kitchen because loving her mother meant betraying her husband. And loving her husband meant accepting slow psychological destruction. There was no winning this intervention. Constance had already won by making it happen. "Okay," I said softly. Daria looked up, hopeful. "Okay. I won't put you in this position again." We walked to the front porch, Preston staying behind to give us privacy that felt more like supervision. "You'll stop asking questions about grandmother Constance." Daria's voice was small, pleading. I cupped her face in my hands. "I'll handle this differently. Trust me." Trust me, the two words I'd been waiting to use as weapon instead of shield. Daria nodded, relieved. Not understanding that differently didn't mean stopped. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then I pulled Otis Ashford's business card from my purse, the one with journalist Simone Redmond's contact information written on the back in his careful handwriting. Daria had asked me to stop asking questions about Constance. She'd never asked me to stop answering them. Going covert meant no more family confrontations, no more putting Daria in impossible positions between mother and monster-in-law. But the investigation wasn't stopping. It was expanding beyond Constance's ability to control the narrative through family pressure and strategic phone calls. I dialed the number before I could second-guess the decision. Simone Redmond answered on the second ring. The first lie I told Daria was easy. "I need some time to myself. Sweetheart, maybe skip Sunday dinner this week." She'd texted back immediately, relieved. "Of course, Mom, take all the time you need." The lies got easier after that. I canceled Tuesday coffee with May. Declined Preston's conciliatory phone call Wednesday morning. Posted a photo on social media, Thursday of tea and a book. The picture of a woman peacefully retreating from conflict into quiet. Domestic life. Every canceled plan, every apologetic message was deliberate theater designed to convince Constance I'd given up. Let her think she won. I told myself while typing the voicemail to Preston, "You were right. I overstepped. Apologies." But while my family saw withdrawal, I was building momentum in spaces Constance couldn't monitor. Tuesday afternoon, I met Otis Ashford at a coffee shop in Victor, 20 minutes outside Rochester, where we wouldn't be recognized. I spread the 3 notebooks across the small table timeline. Witnesses, professional interference like battle plans. "You're doing the smart thing," Otis said, scanning pages. "Public silence, private documentation. Abusers rely on their targets fighting visibly so they can play victim. You're denying her that. How long until we can file?" "I'm submitting preliminary inquiries this week. Background checks, public records requests on the Heritage Society tenure, financial documentation." He looked up. "Legal cases move slowly, but they move." Wednesday morning, I met Simone Redmond for the first time at a diner in Fairport. She was 43, sharp-eyed, with the particular intensity of investigative journalists who'd spent years chasing a story nobody else believed mattered. She'd been covering Rochester community affairs for the Democrat and Chronicle for 15 years. And the moment I mentioned Constance Gallagher's name on the phone Saturday, she'd said exactly what Otis predicted. "I've been waiting years for someone to go on record about Constance Gallagher." Now, she sat across from me, taking notes in shorthand while I laid out the evidence. I have names, dates, witnesses spanning 3 decades. Simone's pen moved fast. "Valerie Gallagher, first wife. Where is she now?" "Buffalo. I haven't contacted her yet." "Don't." Simone looked up. "Let me. If you reach out, Constance's lawyers will claim coordinated harassment. If a journalist finds her independently during background research, that's different. Retreat is just advance in the opposite direction. Napoleon knew it. And now, I did too." I spent Wednesday afternoon and all day Thursday maintaining the fiction of wounded silence. Didn't call Daria, didn't text May. Let Constance's network report back that Lillian Harrington had retreated into hurt isolation. Thursday evening at 6:30. My phone rang. Constance. I almost didn't answer, then realized this was the test if I was truly backing down. I'd take her call and accept gracious victory. "Constance." I made my voice tired. "Lillian, I wanted to check on you. Preston mentioned you've been taking some personal time." "I have. I'm glad you came to your senses." Her tone was magnanimous, forgiving. "Family comes first. I knew you'd realize that once you had time to think clearly." My phone buzzed twice in 5 minutes. First, Constance, then Simone Predator and Hunter, neither knowing the other existed. "You're absolutely right, Constance," I said, watching a text notification appear at the top of my screen. "Family comes first." We exchanged pleasantries for another minute, her relief barely masked as concern. My capitulation performed with just enough weariness to seem genuine. The moment she hung up, I opened Simone's text. "Found something. Meet tomorrow. Bring documentation." I stared at the message, heart pounding. 4 days of public silence, canceled dinners. Apologetic voicemails had bought me exactly what I needed: Constance's complacency and a journalist's breakthrough. Whatever Simone had found, it was urgent enough to demand a face-to-face meeting within 24 hours. The tight phrasing, "found something," not found information or discovered details, suggested evidence, not theory. Something concrete, something Constance didn't know existed or thought was safely buried. I texted back, "Where and when?" The response came immediately: "Java's 9 a.m. Come alone." I sat in my quiet house, phone glowing in my hand, and allowed myself the first real smile in 4 days. Constance thought she'd won. She'd called to gloat disguised as concern, believing I'd surrendered. She had no idea the war had just moved to terrain she couldn't control. Simone Redmond slid a yellowed newspaper clipping across the conference table. 2018, buried in community briefs. 4 paragraphs long. "Rochester Women's Heritage Society announces leadership transition," the headline read. Bland. Institutional, the kind of announcement you skim past without thinking. I'd arrived at the Democrat and Chronicle building at 9 sharp. Been shown to a small conference room where Simone had spread file folders across the table like an autopsy. Now she was walking me through what she'd found in 48 hours of archive diving. Leadership transition. Simone's finger tapped the clipping. That's what they called it when 3 board members threatened to resign unless Constance was removed. I read the 4 paragraphs. Constance Gallagher stepping down after distinguished service, mutual decision, pursuing other interests. The language was so carefully neutral, it practically screamed cover-up. So this pattern goes back years, I said quietly. Public record. Public record that no one connected because the families involved signed NDAs. Simone pulled out another folder. But ND as don't seal newspaper archives or Heritage Society meeting minutes. They just keep people from talking about what the documents already say. The evidence had been hiding in plain sight, not buried, just scattered and euphemized into bureaucratic invisibility. Constance's protection hadn't come from actual secrecy, but from institutional embarrassment, legal intimidation, and the fact that no one had cared enough to ask the right questions. Until now. Simone spread 3 more documents across the table. Ellen Hartley, junior board member, resigned April 2018. Margaret Sutherland, volunteer coordinator, resigned May 2018. Patricia Morrison, event planning chair, resigned June 2018. I recognized one of the names. Dr. Patricia Morrison, Daria's former therapist. Really? Simone made a note. That's interesting. 3 women, all leadership positions under Constance, all gone within 6 months of that announcement. I called Ellen Hartley yesterday. She wouldn't give me details NDA, but when I asked if she'd been psychologically abused by Constance Gallagher, she started crying and hung up. I stared at the names, the dates, the careful institutional language covering systematic cruelty. How many others had Constance silenced with lawyers and institutional loyalty? How many Ellen Hartleys had signed agreements, promising never to speak about what happened, then carried the damage alone for years? She did to them what she did to Beatrice, I said. To me. And probably to others we haven't found yet. Simone met my eyes. This is who she is. Lillian. Family, community organizations, anywhere she has power, the pattern doesn't change. Then it's time people knew. Simone leaned back in her chair. I can write the story. I have sources, documentation, a clear pattern across decades. But you need to understand once this goes public, there's no walking it back. Constance will know you were the primary source. Your family will know. I thought about Daria begging me to stop, Preston's uncomfortable intervention, May's worried secrets. Constance's gloating phone call Thursday evening, believing she'd won. Gallagher family anniversary party, I said, June 14th. Everyone will be there, Preston's cousins. Extended family, 40 people expecting celebration at Highland Park Pavilion. Simone straightened. Public confrontation. You're sure? The calendar on my phone glowed 3 weeks until I stopped being the good daughter-in-law and became the reckoning Constance never saw coming. 3 weeks to prepare, I said. Compile evidence, contact the NDA signers off record for background, verify every detail. Then everything changes. Simone smiled the particular smile of investigative journalists who'd been waiting years for a story to finally break. I'll need access to your documentation, interviews with witnesses willing to speak. And we coordinate timing carefully. Article publishes the morning of June 14th, before the party. So when people arrive, they'll have already read the truth. Exactly. We shook hands across the table covered in evidence of Constance's decades-long pattern. The investigation phase was over. Execution began now. Walking to my car 20 minutes later, I felt the weight of 3 weeks pressing against my chest. Not burden, but countdown. June 14th, the Gallagher family anniversary, when 40 relatives would gather at Highland Park Pavilion expecting celebration. Constance would be guest of honor, 70 years old, surrounded by family who revered her. She had no idea she'd be on trial. 3 weeks, that's when everything changes. 14 days until the anniversary party, and Otis's conference table looked like a prosecutor's war room. I'd spent the past week assembling everything: notebooks, printed emails, photographed text messages, witness statements, archived newspaper clippings Simone had copied for me. Now it was spread across Otis's office in chronological order. 3 years of Constance Gallagher's systematic cruelty reduced to documentation you could touch and count. When you see it all together like this, Otis said, studying the timeline we'd constructed, the pattern is undeniable. I'd organized incidents by date, starting January 2024 when Daria and Preston got engaged. The entries marched forward in careful rose criticism disguised as concern. Undermining parenting decisions. The supervisor interference. May's confused reports about Nana's private comments. Each incident was annotated with witnesses present, exact quotes when available, and Daria's documented responses. 32 documented incidents over 3 years, I said. Just what I could prove. Otis picked up a photograph Daria at the Easter dinner last year, smiled tight and exhausted. And this shows the escalation. Early incidents are verbal criticism. By year 2, she's interfering with employment. By year 3, she's using May as messenger and surveillance. The pattern was identical to domestic violence cycles I'd read about in the books Otis had recommended: honeymoon period with gifts and praise, tension building with subtle criticism, explosion of direct attack, then remorse and reconciliation before the cycle repeated. Constance had been running this pattern on Daria for 36 months, each loop tightening the psychological control. This would hold up in court, Otis said, but we're not going to court, we're going to a family party, where 40 people will witness it. Exactly. He moved to the second section of documentation, Simone's archived evidence, the society removal. That's what makes this bigger than family drama. 3 years of gaslighting reduced to bullet points abuse loses power when you force it onto spreadsheets. When you make someone's cruelty into data, they can't argue with or reframe. Constance's manipulation worked in private, in whispered conversations and isolated moments. But here on Otis's conference table, her abuse was just facts arranged in damning sequence. Shows she's done this before, Otis continued. 2 others, repeatedly. Ellen Hartley, Margaret Sutherland, Patricia Morrison, 3 women who left the Heritage Society within months of each other. If even one of them breaks their NDA to corroborate the pattern, Constance can't dismiss this as family conflict. So when I confront her at the party, it's not revenge, I said quietly. It's exposure. Public accountability, Otis nodded. With Simone's article publishing that morning, newspaper documentation establishing historical pattern, and your testimony in front of witnesses, Constance loses control of the narrative. He flipped through the dossier again, then paused on a section I'd flagged but left incomplete. The one gap here is May's experience. A child's perspective would be powerful what a 6-year-old observes without adult filtering. The confusion about why Nana says different things to different people, the worried secrets. That testimony would cement the psychological abuse pattern. May's name on the page made my chest tighten. Evidence was one thing. Weaponizing my granddaughter was another. She's 6, I said. I won't traumatize her to win an argument. I'm not suggesting you traumatize her. But May's already carrying this. You documented that yourself. Otis tapped the notebook where I'd recorded May's playground confession about Nana's snack time criticism. The question is whether making it conscious, making it named, would help her process what she's already experiencing, or would make it worse. I thought about May in her booster seat, asking if worried secrets were normal, relieved when I'd asked her to help me remember, like she'd been waiting for permission to tell someone what felt wrong. And practically, Otis continued, setting down the dossier, May's testimony could seal it. Not in court at the party. If you're going to confront Constance publicly, having your granddaughter able to articulate what she experienced makes it undeniable. He closed the dossier carefully. Can you talk to her safely? May's face lit up when I appeared at school pickup instead of her mother's small mercies. Being the grandmother, kids are happy to see. Grandma, she threw herself into my arms, backpack bouncing. Are we going somewhere special? I thought we could go to Highland Park, swings and ice cream. Does that sound good? Yes. She grabbed my hand, already pulling me toward the car. I'd texted Daria an hour earlier, want me to pick up May and give you an afternoon to yourself. The reply came instantly. You're a lifesaver. Thank you. No suspicion, no questions, just a grateful daughter accepting her mother's help. The playground was nearly empty on a Wednesday afternoon, a few toddlers with nannies, an elderly man reading on a bench. I pushed May on the swings for 10 minutes, letting her chatter about spelling tests and recess drama, building the comfortable normalcy that made hard conversations possible. When we moved to the park bench with our ice cream vanilla for her, chocolate for me, I said casually. I've been thinking about our family lately, how everyone gets along. May licked her cone, legs swinging. Like who? Like you and Nana Constance. You two spend time together, right? Sometimes. She takes me to the library. May paused, something shifting in her expression. Are you asking questions again? 6 years old, and she already recognized when adults were gathering information. But she didn't pull away, she waited, trusting me enough to be honest about my purpose. I'm trying to understand things better, I said. Is that okay? She nodded. Serious now. What do you want to know? When you're with Nana Constance, does she talk about your mom? Sometimes. May's voice got quieter. She says Mom cries too much. That she should be stronger like you were when Grandpa Douglas died. Ice cream melted forgotten in my hand. When does she say things like that? When we're alone, at the library, or when she picks me up from school and we go to her house before Mom gets off work. May kicked her feet against the bench. When other people are there, she's different, nice. She tells Mom she's doing a good job and that May is wonderful. But when it's just us, she says Mom needs to be better. The worst part wasn't what May said, it was how casually she said it, like cruelty was weather. Like this was simply how Nana talked. Nothing unusual, just another fact of her 6-year-old life. Does that bother you? I asked gently. The different things Nana says. May thought about it, cone dripping onto her hand. It makes my stomach feel funny, like I'm supposed to tell Mom what Nana said. But if I do, Mom gets quiet and sad. So I stopped telling her. You've been carrying that by yourself. Yeah, her voice was very small. I put my arm around her, pulling her close against my side. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, sweetheart. We finished our ice cream in silence. Then I pushed her on the swings again, higher this time, until she was shrieking with laughter. 6 years old and free for these few minutes from adult secrets and confused loyalties. How do you tell a 6-year-old that the grandmother who brings her cookies also weaponizes her innocence against her own daughter? That every private comment about Mommy being weak is training May to see her mother as inadequate? You don't. You just listen, and you remember, and you make sure the cycle stops before it damages another generation. Walking back to the car, May slipped her hand into mine. Are you asking because something's wrong with Nana? Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her grip tightened. I'm asking because I want to make sure you're okay, I said honestly. I'm okay when I'm with you. She looked up at me. Did I help? Grandma. My throat closed. So much, sweetheart. Driving her home. I replayed her words in my mind not to build a case, but to understand the damage. Constance had been grooming May the same way she'd controlled everyone else's isolation. Mixed messages. Manufactured confusion about what was real and what was performance. May's testimony wasn't just evidence of past abuse. It was proof the cycle would continue unless someone stopped it. Constance's text arrived at 4 p.m. Thursday, 2 hours after I'd dropped May at home. Family meeting tonight, 7 p.m. My home mandatory attendance for important announcement. I stared at the message. Mandatory. Important. The words of someone who expected obedience without question. Daria called 5 minutes later, voice tight. Did you get Mom Constance's text? Just now. Preston says we have to go, that it's about the anniversary party. She paused. I have a bad feeling. So do I said quietly, but we'll go together. Constance's formal dining room was set like a business meeting, not dinner. Documents stacked at the head of the table, reading glasses positioned precisely, water glasses at each place setting. She greeted us with the warm smile she used when performing generosity. Thank you all for coming on short notice. She gestured to chairs. I've been thinking about family unity lately. How we can preserve harmony for future generations. Preston sat beside his mother, posture rigid. Daria took the chair across from them, and I positioned myself next to my daughter. What kind of agreement? Preston asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. Constance slid documents across the table. Just formalizing our family values, roles, responsibilities, legacy. I had my attorney draft it to ensure clarity. I pulled the papers closer. Scanning. The header read, Gallagher Family Harmony and Heritage Agreement. Beneath it, dense legal language organized into numbered sections. Section 3 made my blood run cold. Defer all major parenting and household decisions to family matriarch, I read aloud. Constance's smile didn't waver. I raised this family successfully after Douglas died. Daria benefits from my experience and guidance. This simply formalizes what's already natural, a grandmother's wisdom supporting a young mother. Daria leaned over to read, her hand finding mine under the table. I felt her fingers trembling. This says I give up the lake house inheritance, Daria whispered. The $450,000 property. The family trust property remains in family trust, Constance corrected smoothly. Under proper stewardship. You and Preston will have access, of course, but ownership stays centralized to prevent dissolution or sale. Meaning you control it, I said flatly. Constance's eyes hardened slightly. Meaning family assets stay protected. I flipped to the signature page. Preston's name was already there, black ink on white paper. Preston's signature was already on the document dated 2 days earlier. You already signed this, Daria said, staring at her husband. When? Tuesday, Preston said quietly. Mom explained it all. It's for the family's good. Daria, for stability. Stability, Daria's voice broke. This gives your mother legal control over how I raise May, over where we live, over money that's supposed to be mine. It ensures harmony, Constance interjected. which is why I need your signature by tomorrow. Daria, Friday at noon. Then we can move forward into the anniversary celebration as a unified family. The timeline clicked into place with terrible clarity. Sign by Friday, 4 days before the planned June 14th confrontation. Before Simone's article could publish, before I could execute any of the careful strategy Otis and I had built. And if I don't sign? Daria asked. Constance's smile turned to ice. Then you've chosen to separate yourself from this family. You won't attend the anniversary party. You won't be welcome at family gatherings. And the trust property, well, the agreement includes provisions for members who refuse participation. Disinheritance, I said. How do you stop a signature that means surrendering your daughter's entire future? Sign by Friday, Constance repeated, sliding a pen across the table toward Daria. Or don't come to the anniversary, your choice. Daria looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Mom, what do I do? I put my hand over the unsigned document, blocking the pen. Don't sign anything, not yet. Constance's expression hardened. Tomorrow, Daria, noon. Walking to the car afterward, Daria clutched the unsigned agreement, hands shaking. Mom, she'll disinherit me. Preston wants me to sign. What choice do I have? Friday was 36 hours away, not enough time to execute the June 14th plan, but enough time to lose everything if I did nothing. I found Daria at her kitchen table at 11 p.m., pen in hand, unsigned agreement in front of her. Phone open to Preston's text. Just sign it, babe. She looked up, eyes red. Mom, what are you doing here? I saw the light on. Where's Preston? Late shift. He's been texting every 30 minutes. She gestured at her phone. He says it's just a formality. That refusing makes me look ungrateful. The pen was expensive, the kind Constance would provide for signing important documents. Put down the pen, I said quietly. What choice do I have? She's won. She always wins. Daria's voice cracked. If I don't sign, I lose the inheritance. Preston will resent me. May grows up knowing I tore the family apart. I sat beside her. What if I told you she hasn't won, that you're not alone? I am alone. Preston chose his mother. You told me to back down. Nobody sees what she does except me, and that makes me feel crazy. Literally seconds from signing. Preston's pressure campaign. Constance's deadline. The isolation, it had nearly worked. You're not crazy, I said, and I never backed down. I pulled out my phone and opened photos, my 3 notebooks, documented timeline, witness statements, archived newspaper articles. I've been documenting everything for 3 months. Timeline, witnesses, archived records, every incident, every manipulation. Daria stared at the screen, scrolling, her hands stilled on May's testimony notes. May, she whispered. She told me about the private comments, the confusion about why Nana says different things, the worried secrets. Daria's face crumpled. I thought I was protecting her. She was already carrying it. I swiped to the Heritage Society archive. This goes beyond our family. 2018, 3 board members forced Constance out for the same pattern. Ellen Hartley, Margaret Sutherland, Patricia Morrison. Dr. Morrison, my old therapist. Constance did to them what she's done to you. Systematic psychological abuse dressed as concern. Before I show you the full extent of what I found. Are you still with me? Comment, A, if you think Daria should confront Constance. Or B, if she should walk away and add 1 reason why in 10 words or less. A quick note, the next part includes some dramatized details to convey the emotional truth of this moment. What matters is understanding the pattern. Daria was crying differently now, not hopeless tears, but recognition, validation. The breaking open of someone told for years their reality wasn't real. You mean I'm not crazy? Her voice was breaking glass. This is real. The moment she said those words, that's when I knew the documentation had been worth it. It's real, it's abuse, and you're not alone anymore. I showed her the compiled dossier, 32 documented incidents over 3 years, each annotated with witnesses, dates, exact quotes. The pattern was undeniable when laid out sequentially. Watching Daria's face change from defeated to determined was like watching someone remember they had bones. You've been building a case this whole time. She looked at me with wonder and heartbreak. For you, I said, so you'd know you weren't imagining it. So when she tried to make you doubt yourself, you'd have proof that what you experienced was real and witnessed. Daria pushed the agreement away, pen clattering. I'm not signing. Whatever happens Friday, I'm not signing. She tore the unsigned agreement in half, hands finally steady. What happens Friday when I don't sign? I pulled out my phone to text Otis and Simone. The June 14th plan was gone, But maybe we didn't need 3 weeks of careful preparation. Maybe we needed 36 hours and the element of surprise. Edna didn't call first, just appeared at my door at 8 a.m. Friday with a manila envelope and the words, "You need to see this before you do anything today." Edna Thornbury was 71, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. A former Heritage Society board member who'd spent 3 days combing archives after I'd asked her to research Constance's 2018 removal. She'd helped organize the Society's files for 40 years and knew where bodies were buried, sometimes literally. In the case of old scandal correspondence, I let her into my living room. She didn't sit down. "I found this in archived correspondence files." She handed me the envelope, expression grim. It was never acted on. Filed under personal matters, resolved internally. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter on cream stationery, dated 7 years earlier, addressed to a board member colleague. "Who wrote it?" I asked. "Douglas's first wife," Edna said quietly. "Before you. Before Daria was born." My hands went cold. Douglas had been married before briefly, in his late 20s. He'd never talked about it much. Divorce finalized before I met him. No children, no contact. I'd assumed it was young marriage that didn't work out. I started reading. The letter was 5 pages, handwritten in careful script that got shakier as it progressed. It detailed systematic abuse identical to what I'd documented: isolation from family and friends, financial control disguised as helping with budgets, public humiliation framed as concern for her well-being, manufactured crises that required Constance's intervention to resolve. "She tells my husband I'm unstable," I read aloud. "Then tells me I'm too sensitive when I react. She criticizes my housekeeping in front of dinner guests while praising my efforts to my face. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "It's the same script," Edna said. "Word for word what you described to me 3 weeks ago." I kept reading. The previous daughter-in-law, her name was Margaret, had tried to tell Douglas what was happening. He'd dismissed it as misunderstanding, told her she was imagining malice where there was only motherly concern. Sound familiar? 7 years this letter sat in an archive, and for 7 years, someone else suffered what could have been prevented. Margaret had fled the marriage after 18 months, lost the custody battle not for children, but for her own reputation. Constance had testified that Margaret was emotionally unstable, provided documentation of erratic behavior, painted herself as the concerned mother-in-law trying to help a troubled young woman. By the time Margaret escaped, her credibility was destroyed. The letter had been her last attempt reaching out to Heritage Society leadership, where Constance was a prominent member, hoping someone would recognize the pattern, would intervene, would stop her. The board member she'd written to had filed it as personal matter and done nothing. 2 years later, that same board quietly negotiated Constance's removal when 3 other women complained about identical treatment. "She's done this before," I said, hands shaking, "to someone else, and no one stopped her." "No one with power to stop her believed it," Edna corrected, "until it happened to enough people that they couldn't ignore the pattern." Chong? Reading another woman's words describing my exact life felt like finding my own ghost. I was her future. And she was my warning. I turned to the final page. The handwriting was barely legible here, written through obvious tears. "Please don't let this happen to someone else," I read aloud. "Please believe that this is real. Please stop her before she does this again." "She's in Vermont now," Edna said. "Margaret remarried, has a daughter. Safe. When I called her yesterday and told her about your situation, she said she'd go on record. Remote testimony, affidavit, whatever you need." I looked up. "I'm the someone else." "You were," Edna said firmly, "but you're not running." "No," I folded the letter carefully. "I'm not. Too late to save Margaret. Too late to stop what happened to me, to Daria, to May. But not anymore." I held the letter proof that Constance's abuse wasn't personal vendetta, but systematic operations spanning decades. Margaret's plea had gone unanswered for 7 years. Today was Friday, Constance's deadline, and now I had something she didn't know existed, a witness she thought she'd silenced forever. Preston arrived at Spot Coffee expecting to negotiate my surrender instead. I slid Edna's letter across the table without saying a word. I'd texted him at 9 a.m., "Meet me at Spot Coffee, noon, just us, important." Now he sat across from me in the lunch crowd, looking cautious but confident. He thought he was here to convince me to back down. "Why am I here, Lillian?" "Because you need to see what you're defending." I pushed the letter across the table. He scanned the first paragraph. "This is about Mom's first daughter-in-law. That was decades ago." "Read it." He read. I watched his face, the certainty wavering as he processed Margaret's words describing isolation, financial control, manufactured crises, the same patterns he'd witnessed with Daria, but explained away. "This doesn't prove," he started. "There's more." I pulled out my tablet, opened the Heritage Society archive, 3 board members threatening resignation, leadership transition, careful institutional language covering systematic abuse. Preston's coffee sat untouched, cooling. The smell of roasted beans filled the space between us. "These are separate incidents," he said, voice losing conviction. "May told me what Constance says when you're not in the room." I pulled up my playground notes. The private comments about Daria being weak. The confusion about why Nana is different when adults aren't watching. "You've seen her do this, Preston. You were there." His hand tightened on the letter. "I thought family dynamics are complicated. Mom lost Dad when I was young. She's protective. Maybe too protective, but complicated or abusive, there's a difference, and you know it." The moment Preston's face changed from defensive to haunted, that's when I knew the evidence had landed. He was remembering specific moments. The supervisor call, the flowers to Daria's boss, May's confused reports he'd explained away. "What does Daria say about this?" he asked quietly. "Daria has been telling you for 3 years. You called it stress, oversensitivity." He flinched. I showed him the chronological timeline, 32 documented incidents. Each one small enough to rationalize alone, devastating as pattern. Preston had been present for 15 of them. "The agreement you want her to sign," I said. "That's not family harmony, that's legal control. Your mother has done this before." To Margaret, to 3 Heritage Society colleagues, to my daughter. "The only variable is whether you keep enabling it." He was quiet, staring at the evidence spread across the table. Outside, downtown Rochester moved past the windows, normalcy continuing while someone's worldview crumbled. How do you tell your son-in-law he married into abuse and spent years helping his mother perfect it? You don't soften it. You show him the pattern and let it speak. "What are you asking me to do?" His voice was barely audible. "You can't unsee this now. Be part of the solution or stay part of the problem." That's not an answer. Stop pressuring Daria to sign that agreement. For starters, I began gathering documents. Acknowledge what you've seen. Protect your wife instead of your mother's reputation. And if I don't, then Saturday, when this becomes public, you'll have chosen which side you're on. Preston's face went pale. "Public. The pattern doesn't stop until it's exposed. You can help protect Daria through that, or you can stand with Constance and face it beside her." I stood, leaving copies on the table. Preston remained seated, looking smaller than when he'd arrived. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You have until Saturday." I picked up my purse. "Choose carefully." Walking to my car, I watched Preston through the window, still seated, staring at the letter, phone in his hand. Would he call Constance to warn her, call Daria to apologize, or call his mother to confirm her version? I'd given him evidence and a deadline. What he did with both would determine whether Saturday brought ally or enemy. Constance called me directly at 2 p.m. Saturday, no preamble, no pleasantries. Just, "We need to talk about tomorrow." I'd been waiting for this. Preston had made his choice Friday afternoon, and now I knew which side he'd chosen. "I know you've been talking to Preston," Constance continued, voice tight with controlled fury. "Trying to turn family against me with your twisted version of events." I said nothing, let the silence stretch. "If you embarrass this family tomorrow," she said, each word precisely enunciated, "I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I have connections. Lillian. The Heritage Society, community leaders, people who matter. You don't." Still, I didn't respond. "You think you can come to my anniversary gathering and cause trouble, I'll have you removed. I'll make sure every social organization in Rochester knows you're mentally unstable. That Douglas's death unhinged you. That you've been harassing me for months." The threat lasted 7 minutes. I spoke exactly 0 words. Constance calling directly proved Preston had contacted her after our Friday meeting whether to warn or question. I didn't know. But her desperation to threaten me suggested she knew something had shifted. Her control was slipping, and intimidation was the only weapon she had left. "Are you even listening?" Constance demanded. "Yes," I said quietly. "Are you finished?" The pause was sharp, brittle. "You'll regret this." I hung up. Silence is its own kind of power. Constance had spent 7 minutes revealing her fear while I'd given her nothing. No defense, no counterattack, no engagement with her threats, just calm acknowledgement that she'd spoken and I'd heard. At 3 p.m. I called Otis. "Everything's ready," he said. Dossiers for Daria, Preston, and 3 cousins' neutral relatives who've known Constance long enough to recognize the pattern once they see documentation. Evidence speaks for itself. She called me, I said, threatened to destroy my reputation if I show up tomorrow. That's desperation. She knows something shifted. Preston told her about our meeting. Maybe. Or maybe he just started asking questions she couldn't answer. Otis paused. Either way, you're still going. Highland Park Pavilion, 2 p.m. I'll introduce you as family friends. Neutral witnesses with documentation, Otis confirmed. See you tomorrow? Simone called at 4 p.m. Articles written, she said. 5,000 words, 3 corroborating sources, archived society documents, timeline spanning 2 decades. Just waiting for your signal tomorrow. How long until it goes live after I give the signal? 20 minutes, already loaded in the system, just needs approval click. Good. I looked at the evidence folders spread across my dining table. Thank you, Simone. Thank you for going on record. This story needed to be told years ago. The rest of Saturday evening passed in methodical preparation. I laid out clothes for tomorrow's simple navy dress, nothing that screamed confrontation, printed final copies of key documents, charged my phone completely, ate dinner without tasting it. Waiting for Sunday felt like standing backstage before opening night, except this performance had no rehearsal and no second chances. At 11, I sat in my living room with the evidence folder open one final time. 3 months of documentation. 32 incidents cataloged across 3 years. Heritage Society archives proving pattern extended decades. Margaret's 7-year-old letter, prophetic and heartbreaking. May's innocent testimony about worried secrets. Edna's research. Otis's legal analysis. Simone's journalism. 2 decades of silence ending in one afternoon. Douglas would have wanted me to protect Daria, even from his own mother. Maybe especially from his own mother, the person he'd spent his life trying to please. Never quite understanding that her love came with conditions that couldn't be met. My phone showed 11:47 p.m. In 12 hours and 13 minutes, 40 relatives would gather at Highland Park Pavilion expecting celebration. Constance would arrive as honored matriarch, 70 years old, surrounded by family who revered her. She had no idea witnesses and documentation were already in place. The clock flipped to 12 a.m. Sunday, June 14th. I closed the evidence folder and said one word to the empty room. Tomorrow. Constance stood at the pavilion's head table in her signature navy dress, welcoming family with the smile of a woman who'd already won. Highland Park Pavilion at 2 o'clock on a perfect June afternoon, white tablecloths snapping in the breeze. 40 relatives mingling under the open-air structure, the smell of catered food mixing with cut grass and lake water. The gathering Constance had planned for months, the celebration where she'd be honored as family matriarch, surrounded by people who loved her. She had no idea it was about to become her trial. I stood near the periphery with a plate of untouched pasta salad, watching Constance work the crowd. Gracious handshakes, warm embraces, that particular laugh she used when someone complimented her dress. She was flawless, the performance, so practiced it looked effortless. Otis stood by the pavilion's west column, looking like any other older gentleman enjoying a family party. Briefcase at his feet containing evidence folders. Simone sat at a middle table with a phone angled to record, appearing to scroll social media while actually documenting everything. Daria approached me, May's hand in hers. She doesn't know you brought witnesses, Daria whispered. She will, I said. Preston stood near the head table. Rigid posture betraying discomfort. He hadn't looked at me once since I'd arrived. Still undecided, or decided but unwilling to show his hand. Either way, he'd made his choice by warning Constance yesterday. At 2:30, Constance called for attention. The crowd quieted, turning toward the head table where she stood backlit by afternoon sun filtering through trees. Family is everything, she began, voice carrying across the pavilion with practiced projection. Without it, we're nothing. That's what this celebration honors, the bonds that tie us together, the sacrifices we make for those we love. The audience was rapt. I watched faces, cousins, extended family, community friends who'd known Constance for decades. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see: a devoted grandmother, a pillar of community, a woman who'd held her family together through tragedy. Watching Constance perform matriarch was like watching a surgeon operate precise, practiced, completely confident the patient wouldn't wake up mid-procedure. I raised my children to value loyalty above all. Constance continued, hand over heart. To put family first, even when it's difficult, even when the world tells them to be selfish, to prioritize individual happiness over collective well-being. A cousin beside me dabbed her eyes. She's always been our rock, the woman murmured. I sipped lukewarm lemonade and thought, she believes her own lies. That's the terrifying part. Somewhere in the decades of manipulation, Constance had convinced herself that control was love, that isolation was protection, that destroying someone's autonomy was the same as caring for them. The speech lasted 12 minutes, every word carefully chosen, every pause calculated for maximum emotional impact. When Constance finished, the applause was genuine and prolonged. The gathering proceeded with false normalcy after that. Food served buffet style, relatives filling plates with chicken and pasta and green beans, toasts given by Preston's cousins, stories shared about family history. Constance moved through it all like a queen at court, gracious, warm, completely in control. Simone's phone remained strategically angled, recording everything. Otis stayed positioned near the exit, evidence folder within reach. I kept May close, waiting for the moment we'd discussed that morning. 40 witnesses, 1 journalist, 1 attorney. And nobody knew the celebration was about to become a trial. At 2:45, as Constance laughed at something a cousin said near the dessert table, May tugged my sleeve. Grandma, can I ask Nana something? I knelt down to her level. What do you want to ask, sweetheart? May's 6-year-old face was serious, thoughtful. If she really meant what she said about family being honest with each other. The question wasn't random. That morning, I'd gently suggested May might want to ask Nana about her speech, giving my granddaughter agency to trigger what was coming, not manipulation permission. May had been carrying worried secrets for months. This was her chance to ask them out loud. I looked at Daria, who stood 10 feet away watching us. She nodded once. The signal. I stepped forward before Constance could turn May's question into a child's misunderstanding. This required facts, not spin. The pavilion stayed silent as I crossed the open space between my peripheral position and the center where Constance stood frozen. May stepped back instinctively, sensing adult tension beyond her understanding. I touched her shoulder gently as I passed. May asked a fair question, I said to the room, not to Constance. Addressing the witnesses directly, making them jury instead of audience. The answer is that what she described is a pattern, not an exception. Constance found her voice. Lillian, this is neither the time nor place. Actually, with family gathered as witnesses, this is exactly the place. I kept my tone conversational, factual. Like presenting quarterly earnings, not making accusations. May's observation about contradictory messages, public praise versus private criticism, is documented across 3 years. A cousin near the dessert table shifted uncomfortably. Another set down her plate. Lillian addressing the room instead of Constance transformed everything. Private family drama became public fact-finding. Constance was no longer matriarch in control, but defendant waiting for charges. You're making a scene, Constance said, voice tight. I'm answering May's question about honesty. I gestured toward Otis, who'd moved closer with the briefcase. Mr. Ashford is an attorney. He's been helping me compile documentation for 3 months. Timeline, witnesses, pattern analysis spanning 32 incidents. Otis nodded to the room, professional and neutral. Constance's laugh was sharp, brittle. This is slander. You're trying to destroy me in front of my family. I'm sharing documented facts. There's a difference. Simone had moved to a better vantage point. Phone still recording. I made eye contact with her briefly, confirming capture. Ms. Redmond is an investigative journalist, I continued, still addressing the gathered relatives. She's been researching pattern behavior. Found archived correspondence from 2018 regarding Constance's removal from Heritage Society leadership after 3 board members. Threatened resignation over treatment concerns. Treating abuse like a quarterly report. Dates. Data. Documentation made it impossible to dismiss as bitter emotion. Constance couldn't claim I was hysterical when I sounded like an accountant presenting audit findings. One of Preston's cousins spoke carefully. Constance, is this true, the Heritage Society thing? That was a misunderstanding, Constance said quickly. Political differences, nothing more. There's a letter, I said. Handwritten, dated 7 years ago, from Douglas's first wife, Margaret, describing systematic psychological abuse identical to what May just observed. Filed with Heritage Society leadership who chose institutional reputation over victim protection. Daria had moved closer, standing where the family could see her clearly. Tears still on her face, but standing. Constance's control was slipping visibly now. You have no right to humiliate me like this. I have evidence. 2 words, "I have evidence," did what 3 years of private confrontation couldn't silence Constance completely. The pavilion was absolutely still, 40 relatives processing the shift from anniversary celebration to something else entirely. Several had phones out, though whether recording or texting I couldn't tell. "Mom's telling the truth," Daria said quietly. Clearly, her first words since May's question. Everything May described the contradictions, the private cruelty, the public performance, it's all real. Preston stood paralyzed 15 feet away, face pale. Constance's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. I watched her cycle through responses, denial, deflection. Playing victim, but nothing worked when 40 people had just heard specific accusations with dates and witnesses. For the first time in decades, the family matriarch had no counterattack, no spin, no way to reframe the narrative. Otis held up the evidence folder, thick with documentation. Simone's phone recorded everything from her position near the head table. And Daria stepped forward to stand beside me. Visible solidarity that contradicted every lie Constance might attempt about family unity. A cousin spoke into the silence. "I think we need to hear this, all of it." Another nodded. "If there's documentation." Constance looked around the pavilion at relatives who'd stopped smiling, at evidence she didn't know existed, at the granddaughter she'd underestimated and the daughter-in-law she'd tried to destroy, now standing together. "This is," she started, voice breaking slightly. "Documented," I finished. "Witnessed, real." Otis opened the folder with the precision of a prosecutor entering evidence. 40 relatives leaned forward like a jury waiting for verdict. "May 2024, he began, reading from the top page. "Constance tells extended family Daria is struggling with depression without Daria's consent or knowledge. 3 witnesses present, including Mrs. Harrington." He flipped to the next page. "July 2024, Constance comments publicly that Daria has gained weight, suggests diet program, frames concern as family caring. Daria reports feeling humiliated, 4 witnesses. The cold, legal format made it impossible to dismiss. These weren't emotional accusations, they were documented dates with witnesses, formatted like evidence in a legal brief. August 2025. Constance offers to help with May's education fund, conditional on decision-making authority over schooling choices. When Daria declines, Constance tells other family members Daria is rejecting family support. Constance's voice cut through. "You're twisting innocent concern into—" "I'm reading documented dates and witnesses," Otis said calmly, without looking up. October 2025, Constance calls Daria's workplace supervisor expressing wellness concerns. December 2025, Constance visits May's school for Grandparents' Day. Uses private moments to criticize Daria's parenting to a 6-year-old child. 23 documented incidents in 3 years. Abuse isn't occasional loss of control. It's full-time operation. Each incident, Otis continued, follows identical pattern isolation of victim, public humiliation disguised as concern, financial control attempts, gaslighting when confronted. This isn't family dysfunction, it's systematic psychological abuse. He set down the timeline and looked at Constance directly. Documented, witnessed, repeatable pattern. Simone stood, holding printed articles. The pattern extends beyond this family. In 2018, the Rochester Women's Heritage Society removed Constance from leadership following complaints of psychological intimidation. Constance's face went pale. That was internal politics. 3 women left positions they'd held for decades. Simone continued, voice carrying clearly across the silent pavilion. All cited your behavior in exit interviews. The society negotiated ND as to avoid public scandal, but the archived documents are still on record. Ellen Hartley, Margaret Sutherland, Dr. Patricia Morrison each reported feeling systematically undermined, publicly criticized while privately praised. Emotionally manipulated. A cousin spoke up. I remember when they all resigned. We thought it was strange. It was hushed up, Simone said. Heritage Society chose institutional reputation over victim protection. But the pattern was identical to what Daria has experienced: isolation. Contradictory messages. Manufactured crises requiring Constance's intervention. Edna Thornberry stood from her seat at a side table, holding a manila envelope. She walked to the center. 71 years old and steady. And there was another daughter-in-law before Daria, she said clearly. She wrote this. Edna pulled out the letter. 7 years old. Cream stationery. Careful handwriting. Douglas's first wife, Margaret. She fled the marriage after 18 months. Before she left, She wrote to a Heritage Society colleague, hoping someone would intervene. She began reading. She tells my husband I'm unstable, then tells me I'm too sensitive when I react to her accusations. I feel like I'm losing my mind. A witness gasped. That's word for word what Daria just described. When the witness gasped word for word, 40 faces turned from Edna's letter to Constance's recognition, blooming like horror. Edna continued reading. She criticizes my housekeeping in front of guests while praising my efforts to my face. She offers to help with finances, then uses access to question every purchase. She manufactures crises that only she can solve, making me dependent on her intervention. Daria had started crying again, but these tears looked different. Relief, validation, proof she wasn't imagining it. Edna held up the letter so relatives could see another woman's handwriting describing Daria's exact experience 7 years before. Daria married into this family. The room's collective gasp turned every head toward Constance. No more misunderstanding, no more family is complicated. Just pattern, documented, witnessed, undeniable spanning decades, multiple victims, identical methods. Constance's laugh came out wrong, too loud, too brittle. The sound of someone drowning who refuses to admit they can't swim. This is a terrible misunderstanding, she said, straightening her spine. Attempting to reclaim matriarch authority through posture alone. Anyone who knows me knows I would never deliberately hurt family. I've dedicated my life to this family, to this community. But the letter from 2017, a cousin interrupted carefully. That was before Lillian even married into the family. Before any of this current situation. Constance's appeal to reputation rather than family bonds revealed exactly what the documentation showed. She valued public perception over actual relationships, social standing over truth. That woman was unstable, Constance said quickly, gesturing dismissively at Edna's letter. Everyone knew she had problems. That's why the marriage ended. You're doing it right now, I said quietly. What the letter described, calling someone unstable when they report your behavior. The pavilion had gone silent again, 40 faces now 38, as two people had quietly slipped away watching Constance cycle through defensive responses. I never said those things, she started, then caught herself. And if I did, Daria took them wrong. She's always been oversensitive, prone to misinterpreting helpful guidance as criticism. She contradicted herself 3 times in 90 seconds. Witnesses stopped listening to words, started watching unraveling. Margaret Holloway, a current Heritage Society board member in her mid-60s who'd been on the board during Constance's 2018 removal, spoke up. Constance, the 2018 board minutes corroborate the pattern. Ellen, Margaret Sutherland, and Dr. Morrison all reported identical experiences. We have documentation. That was political infighting, Constance said, voice rising. Personal vendettas disguised as 3 separate women, Margaret Holloway said firmly, using nearly identical language to describe your behavior. Just like this letter from 2017. Just like what Daria described today. Constance's face flushed. You're ganging up on me. All of you. Listening to lies and gossip instead of remembering everything I've done for this family, for the society, for Rochester. We're listening to documented evidence from multiple independent sources, Otis said calmly. Preston sat frozen at a nearby table, hands flat on the tablecloth, not defending his mother anymore, not defending anyone. Just staring at the evidence folder like it contained a language he was still learning to read. Daria stood beside me now, visible and present, no longer hiding. Margaret Holloway quietly gathered her purse. She didn't make a scene, didn't announce departure, just stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the pavilion exit. Margaret, Constance called after her, desperation creeping into her voice. Surely you don't believe— I believe documented evidence from multiple sources, Margaret said without stopping. I believed it in 2018, and I believe it now. 2 cousins exchanged glances, stood, followed Margaret out. Then an older couple I recognized as neighbors. Then another Heritage Society member. Watching community members leave was like watching Constance's carefully built house lose bricks one by one, slow collapse. Irreversible. After everything I've done for this community, Constance's voice rose, losing the controlled modulation she'd maintained for decades. You're just going to abandon me based on accusations from bitter people with grudges. But they kept leaving, not dramatically, just quietly gathering belongings and walking away. The exodus of witnesses who'd seen enough evidence to stop performing loyalty. The people leaving first weren't family, they were Heritage Society members, community leaders, neighbors who'd admired Constance's public face for years. The audience she'd spent decades performing for. Now, withdrawing the social capital she'd valued above everything. 6 people had left, then 8, then 12. The pavilion that had held 40 now held 28. And the empty chairs formed a growing semicircle around Constance like a moat she couldn't cross. Preston sat frozen, staring at his hands. Daria stood beside me, tears dried, standing straight. May had been taken inside by a cousin earlier, spared watching her grandmother's public collapse. And Constance stood in the center of diminishing witnesses, facade finally cracking into visible panic as she watched the community respect she'd cultivated for 70 years evaporate in real time. The woman who'd terrorized my family for years was finally facing the consequence she'd avoided through control isolation. Preston stood slowly. Chair scraping pavilion floor, the sound cut through murmured conversations like a verdict being read. 28 people remained in the pavilion, down from 40. The empty chairs formed a semicircle of absence around Constance. And now Preston was moving, crossing the open space with deliberate steps. He walked to Daria and stood beside her, not facing Constance yet, just positioning himself. Body language announcing his decision before words could confirm what everyone already understood from his movement. Then he turned to face his mother. "I should have seen this years ago," Preston said quietly, voice carrying in the pavilion's acoustic space. "I'm sorry I didn't." Constance's face went white. "Preston, you can't believe these lies about your own mother." "They're not lies, Mom." He put his hand on Daria's shoulder. "The documented evidence, the multiple sources, the pattern spanning decades. I watched you try to deflect and contradict yourself. I heard what you said versus what the evidence showed." "I'm your mother," Constance said, voice breaking. "And Daria is my wife. May is my daughter." Preston's tone stayed calm, matter of fact. "We'll be establishing clear boundaries from now on. What those look like exactly, we'll figure out, but the pattern ends today." The word boundaries, calm, clinical, final hit Constance harder than any accusation could have. She turned to me, eyes blazing. "Are you satisfied now destroying family unity in front of everyone? Turning my own son against me? Humiliating me publicly at my own anniversary celebration?" I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that years ago. To multiple women. Margaret fled her marriage. 3 Heritage Society colleagues resigned. Daria spent 3 years questioning her own reality. May learned to carry worried secrets at 6 years old." Constance opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. "I simply ensured the damage was visible instead of hidden. Protection, not revenge." The remaining guests were gathering belongings now. Quiet exodus continuing. A few cousins approached Daria with brief hugs, murmured support. One pressed a phone number into her hand. "Call me if you need anything." I picked up my purse. Daria took Preston's hand. May emerged from inside the pavilion where a cousin had been keeping her occupied, running to her father. "Are we leaving Nana's party?" May asked, confused by the tension she could feel but not fully understand. "Yes, sweetheart," Preston said, picking her up. "We are." Daria turned to me as we walked toward the exit. "Thank you for not letting me sign that agreement." "You would have figured it out," I said. "Maybe, but you made sure I didn't have to lose everything first." Walking away felt like closing a book I'd been forced to read for 3 years, finally putting it down. Finally done. We passed through the pavilion's glass doors into June sunshine. Behind us, the last few guests departed quietly. No goodbyes to Constance, just steady withdrawal. I glanced back through the glass. Constance stood in the center of 40 empty chairs, anniversary decorations still bright around her white tablecloths. Flower centerpieces. The banner reading, "Family, Our Greatest Blessing." The celebration she'd planned for months, transformed into public trial and abandoned by nearly everyone who'd attended. The family matriarch, finally alone with the reputation she'd valued more than the people she'd destroyed to protect it. No one stood beside her, no children rallying to her defense, no community members offering support. Just empty chairs bearing witness to decades of isolation disguised as love, control disguised as care, abuse disguised as family unity. The isolation she'd created for so many others, now hers. Visible at last. The Heritage Society newsletter arrived Tuesday with a single-line announcement buried on page 3. Constance Gallagher has resigned her advisory position, effective immediately. 4 days after the anniversary gathering, and the consequences were unfolding without me needing to orchestrate anything. 40 witnesses had gone home Sunday and started talking. Not dramatically, just quiet conversations with spouses, friends, other committee members. By Monday afternoon, the Heritage Society board had held an emergency meeting. Edna called me Tuesday morning. The board voted unanimously to accept her resignation. Actually, they requested it first. Constance just made it official. How's the board handling it publicly? They're not. That one-line announcement is all you'll see. No explanation, no tribute to her years of service, just quiet removal. I didn't have to campaign against Constance or seek revenge. 40 witnesses did the work themselves, protecting their own reputations by distancing from someone with documented abuse spanning decades. By Wednesday, I'd heard through Daria that 3 other committees had asked for Constance's resignation. The Arts Council, the Community Foundation, the Women's Leadership Forum. All positions she'd held for years, all quietly reassigned without public statement. None of it was dramatic shunning. Just professional distancing organizations protecting institutional reputations from association with exposed patterns that could create liability. Is it wrong that I'm relieved? Daria asked when she called Wednesday evening. No, I said. It's protection. She can't use those platforms to manipulate anymore. Can't leverage community standing to make you look unstable by contrast. 3 people from the anniversary called me this week, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all saying they'd seen things but didn't know how to name them. Now they have language for it. That's what documentation does. 3 committees, 2 boards. 1 honorary position, all gone by Thursday noon without a single phone call to Constance requesting reconsideration. The social calendar I knew Constance maintained meticulously had emptied. Fundraising galas that usually featured her as honored guest quietly uninvited her. Not through direct confrontation, but through failure to send invitations that normally arrived months in advance. I heard through community networks the invisible information flow of women who'd lived in Rochester for decades that Constance had tried calling several committee chairs. None returned her calls. That silence said more than any public denouncement could. The standing she'd valued above actual family relationships was dissolving in real time, and I was watching it happen without lifting a finger. Friday morning, the Democrat and Chronicle published Simone's article on page A7, When Family Power Dynamics Cross into Abuse. I read it over coffee at my kitchen table. Simone never named Constance, never named Daria, never explicitly referenced the anniversary gathering. But the article detailed a recognizable pattern: psychological control disguised as family loyalty, multi-generational targeting, institutional enabling through social standing, the difficulty of proving abuse that leaves no physical marks. Patterns of familial psychological abuse often persist for decades. I read aloud to my empty kitchen. Enabled by social standing and institutional reluctance to intervene until documentation forces accountability. Reading Simone's article felt like watching an obituary for someone still alive, eulogy for reputation, not person. The article quoted experts on coercive control, cited statistics about elder-on-adult child abuse, explained how social capital protects abusers. Every paragraph could have been describing Constance specifically. Anyone who'd attended Sunday's gathering would recognize the pattern immediately. But the absence of Constance's name made it more powerful. Everyone who read it filled in the blank themselves. 40 witnesses, plus everyone they'd told. Plus everyone who knew Constance's community profile, all understanding exactly who fit the described pattern. I reached the final paragraph. Anonymous family sources expressed relief that these patterns are finally receiving public attention, hoping visibility prevents future victims. The hardest part, one source stated, was years of being told my reality wasn't real. Having that validated, documented, witnessed changes everything. I knew who those sources were. Daria had spoken to Simone on Tuesday, finding her voice for the first time in 3 years. My daughter. Breaking silence. The consequence Constance never anticipated once the pattern was named publicly. It couldn't be unnamed. The silence was broken, permanently. Daria opened the door laughing, actually laughing, not the careful smile I'd seen for 3 years. And I realized I'd forgotten what my daughter's joy sounded like. Mom. She pulled me into a hug before I could knock. Perfect timing. We're making pancakes, and May insisted on adding way too many chocolate chips. 2 weeks after the article published, and this was the first Saturday brunch at Daria's house. Inside, May sat at the kitchen table covered in flour, Preston flipping pancakes at the stove. The scene looked ordinary family weekend morning. Messy and warm, but I'd watched this same kitchen feel like a stage for performance for 3 years. The difference now was immediate and tangible. May, screen time, May said automatically, reaching for her tablet. No, sweetheart, screen time after lunch, Daria said firmly. That's the rule I set. May pouted but put the tablet down. No argument. No testing. Just acceptance that Mom had said no and meant it. The changes in Daria weren't forced positivity or conscious performance. They were genuine confidence showing in small automatic decisions she made without seeking permission first. "We're thinking Italian for lunch," Daria said, pouring coffee. "That place on East Avenue you like, if that works for you." Not asking Preston's approval, not deferring to anyone's preference before stating her own. Just choosing. May looked up from her pancakes. "Mom, you seem happier. Did something good happen?" Daria smiled, no checking the room for approval first. "Yes, baby, something very good." Watching Daria set a boundary with May firm, kind, without apologizing, felt like witnessing someone remember they had a spine. After brunch, Preston followed me into the kitchen while Daria helped May wash sticky hands. "Lillian, can I say something?" I turned. Preston looked exhausted but present in a way he hadn't been at the anniversary gathering. "I spent years choosing my comfort over Daria's safety," he said quietly. "Every time Mom undermined her, I told myself it was complicated family dynamics instead of abuse. Every time Daria came to me hurt, I minimized instead of protected. I'm sorry." I'd heard plenty of performative apologies in 66 years. This didn't sound like one. "Are you changing or just apologizing?" I asked. "We start couples therapy Monday," Preston said. "I've been seeing someone individually since last week. And Mom's visits with May are supervised only, period. I enforce that boundary, not Daria. She shouldn't have to be the one saying no to my mother." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, printed therapy appointment confirmations. Evidence of follow-through, not just words. "Daria needs to hear this too," I said. "I've told her, multiple times. But I owed you an apology separately. I watched you try to protect her, and I dismissed your concerns as overreaction." I nodded. "Keep going to therapy. Keep enforcing boundaries. That's what matters." Later, Daria and I sat on the porch while May played in the yard with Preston. June sun warm, lemonade cold. The kind of afternoon that felt stolen from a different timeline where the past 3 years hadn't happened. "We've set clear boundaries with Constance," Daria said. "She can see May with supervision, Preston or you present. But she doesn't get private access to me anymore. No phone calls unless I initiate. No input on parenting or household decisions. No financial discussions. How are you feeling about that?" "Relieved," Daria said. "And guilty for feeling relieved. And angry that I feel guilty." She laughed. "Therapy's helping me untangle all that. It takes time. Thank you for not letting me disappear." Disappear, one word that captured 3 years of erasure I'd watched happen in real time. Daria's embrace wasn't brief or polite. She held on like someone who'd been drowning and finally reached shore. Over her shoulder, I saw Preston and May playing tag in the yard. Ordinary family scene that 2 weeks ago seemed impossible. Healing wasn't linear, wasn't instant. But watching my daughter set boundaries without apologizing. Laugh without checking for permission. Choose a restaurant without deferring to anyone's comfort, it was real. The woman Constance had tried to erase was remembering she existed. I saw Constance before she saw me, diminished somehow. Smaller in the elementary school chair, like clothes that no longer fit quite right. May's end-of-year program was tonight, the kind of event where grandparents arrived early to claim good seats. I'd gotten there 20 minutes before start time, settling into the third row. The auditorium filled slowly, parents with phones out, younger siblings fidgeting, teachers herding students backstage. Then Constance walked in. She sat in the back row, alone. The supervised visit arrangement allowed her to attend May's events, but she came solo. No community members to perform for. No social capital to leverage, just an elderly woman at a granddaughter's school program. But it wasn't just that. She looked older. Not 3 weeks older, years older. Like the facade had been weight-bearing and removing it revealed structural damage underneath. Her posture uncertain, hands folded in lap rather than commanding armrests. The woman who'd stood at the pavilion's head table radiating authority was gone. This is what she'd feared most, I realized. Not confrontation, irrelevance. I didn't feel victory. Just done. The lights dimmed for the program to start. In that moment before darkness, Constance's eyes found mine across the auditorium. 3 seconds of eye contact contained 3 years of warfare acknowledged, documented, finished. No anger from me, no apology from her, just mutual recognition that the score was settled, damage documented, consequences delivered. Not forgiveness or reconciliation, simply acknowledgement that this particular story was over. Neither of us looked away quickly. No shame, no avoidance, just seeing. We both knew this was the last time we'd see each other. That knowledge passed between us in those 3 seconds, understood without words. The boundary Daria and Preston had established meant our paths wouldn't cross again. This accidental encounter at May's school event final intersection. The lights went completely dark when they came back up on stage. Both of us had turned forward. May's class performed a song about seasons changing. She stood in the second row, purple dress bright against the stage curtain, singing with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of 6-year-olds who haven't learned to be embarrassed yet. Daria and Preston slipped into the row beside me, just as the song started. "Sorry we're late," Daria whispered. "Traffic." Preston sat on Daria's other side, the 3 of us together. Family alignment visible to anyone watching. I wondered if Constance noticed from her back row seat. Probably, but it didn't matter anymore. The program continued songs, recitations, a surprisingly competent rendition of a short play. May delivered her 2 lines clearly. No stumbling. I recorded it on my phone like every other grandmother there. I expected to feel triumph at this moment, watching May perform while Constance sat isolated in the back. Instead, I felt the quiet relief of putting down something heavy I'd carried too long. After curtain call, parents and grandparents filtered toward the exits. May ran to us, still wearing her costume crown. "Did you see me, Grandma Lillian?" "I saw everything. Sweetheart, you were perfect." May hugged me. Then Daria, then Preston. Completely ordinary family moment, no performance, no checking for approval. Just joy. We walked toward the east exit, May between her parents holding both their hands. Through the crowd, I saw Constance heading toward the west exit alone. Our paths diverged naturally. No dramatic avoidance, just 2 people leaving the same event through different doors. She didn't look back, neither did I. Some stories end with slamming doors and final speeches. This one ended with separate exits, quiet and final. Walking to the parking lot with Daria, Preston, and May ahead of me chattering about post-performance ice cream. I heard Constance's car start in the opposite direction, engine sound fading into distance. Final divergence. No dramatic goodbye, no closure conversation. Just 2 women leaving the same event through different doors, heading to different futures. The last encounter wasn't a battle. It was an ending,